My phone tells me it's 10:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Just to introduce ourselves, first off, my name is Shiree Roberts. I am an objects conservator at the Church History Museum. Big fan. Just so you know, we are passing out just like a little sign-up sheet. We have some resources that we would love to share with you guys after the presentation. And so if you give us your emails, that will be great, and we will distribute stuff afterwards.
Hello. Okay. I'm Stacey Kelly. I'm the Director of Collections and the Conservator at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, and my specialty is actually paper.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Wixom, and I'm the Collections Manager at the BYU Museum of Art. And we hope you guys enjoy our presentation. Oh, thanks.
All right. Can you guys hear me with this microphone? Do I need to move it closer to my mouth? No, not. Okay. Yeah. All right, how about now? So we're here today to talk about light in heritage spaces. And by that, I mean anywhere where we are exhibiting artifacts and art. So in general, humans love light. We love bright, airy spaces with big windows. The bigger, the better, right? We put street signs up everywhere that blink and set off lights. As we know, light pollution is a problem. We love light so much. But when it comes to our heritage spaces, that story changes. Light is one of our 10 agents of deterioration, and it causes permanent and irreversible damage to collections objects. Both chemical composition, physical structure, and appearance of collection items are all damaged from light. So what do I mean when I say light? That's kind of a big term. Well, here I have an example of the electromagnetic spectrum. And what we're focusing on is that middle section, both visible light and UV. Here in the United States, we generally measure light in foot candles. Most other places in the world use lux. 1 foot candle is approximately 10 lux. And so you can do some easy conversions no matter where you're getting information about light. That's just a good thing to be aware of. And UV, we tend to measure in microwatts per lumen. So something that we sometimes hear as collection managers is, you know, the only kind of light that we need to worry about is UV. If we can get rid of UV, we have protected our collections, we've taken care of everything, we are good to go. Unfortunately, that is not true. For items that are sensitive to light, UV usually only contributes a maximum of 50% of the light damage that you see, and often only 10% of the light damage that you will observe in objects. So here I have an example of a variety of materials from various heritage spaces that have been damaged from visible light. Most organic materials are sensitive to visible light damage, and it tends to lighten or bleach colors. On the other hand, UV causes chalking, yellowing, weakening, disintegration, embrittlement of materials. And for items that are robust to visible light damage, like say permanent pigments, most of the damage is going to come from UV light. So you really do need to control for both in your heritage spaces. Another thing that we sometimes hear is, well, sunlight is the only kind of light that we need to worry about. If we can get rid of sunlight, then our heritage spaces will be safe. Unfortunately, this is also untrue. If you think about it, by definition, if something is emitting light, whether it's halogen light, fluorescent light, video screens, projectors, all of those things are by definition a source of visible light because you can see light coming from it. And so all are something that you need to think about and consider when you are trying to control for visible light in your space. Most light sources also emit UV. So I have here just a couple of charts where you can get some rough estimates of the amounts of visible light and ultraviolet light that different light sources produce. But we do want to give a shout out for LEDs. In addition to being very energy saving, They also tend to produce, not always, but usually produce very, very low, almost negligible amounts of UV. And so we tend to like to use them in our heritage spaces. Your collections people will be happy if you switch to LEDs. So another thing to be aware of with light damage is that light damage is cumulative. Now that means that if you have an object and you've had it out on an exhibit, you pull it from exhibit, you put it in the dark, all you're doing is stopping the progression of that light damage. You aren't undoing anything. It can't repair itself. When it is off display, you can just halt the damage that is occurring. The other thing to be aware of is that light damage is a function both of time and intensity. So if you exhibit something for at a very bright light for a short period of time, you are actually going to do the same amount of damage as if you show it at a low level of light for a long period of time. So you've got to keep both things in mind when you are trying to check your light in your heritage spaces. The good news is that light damage can be quantified and it can be controlled. So we've got at the top a little example of a blue wool card. You might be familiar with the blue wool standards. They were originally developed for the textile industry, but now we use them throughout the heritage industry because you've got a sequence of dyes from 1, which is very sensitive, to 8, which is very insensitive, that fade at known rates. And you can correlate those rates of fade to collection materials. There are quite a lot of charts and lighting schemes that are available online or in other sources, and they are based around these 8 levels of sensitivity. There is actually a device available, generally only used in large national museums because of the cost, called a light fade meter. It can take a, it's a micro-destructive technique where you can take, like, it shines a really bright light on a small spot and you can get the exact ISO rating of the material. However, like I said, they are quite expensive. It is micro-destructive. It can be difficult to use on 3-dimensional objects. It tends to do better with paper or other flat surfaces. And you also have to think, if you have something that's got quite a few materials or quite a few pigments, you really would need to sample each of those pigments or materials if you want to get a sense for everything that is there on that space, because your object is only as stable as its most unstable material. So they are out there. You probably aren't going to use them. Most places instead use the charts that give them basic sensitivity categories that tell you what kind of materials are in those sensitivity categories and what kind of lighting conditions are appropriate for those sensitivity categories. The advantage of using a designated lighting system or a lighting strategy is that it gives you that control where you can plan and expect what you are going to have happen. So even if you're a space where you have to leave items out on continuous display, it's still useful to learn more information because you're going to have an understanding of what kind of lifespan to expect for those materials. So the rate at which colors change is known as a just noticeable fade. That's kind of the unit of measure that we use when we're talking about light damage. Most objects are considered to have 10 just noticeable fades before they cease to be useful for your collection. What that means is that most lighting strategies are built around the question of how long do you want your collection to last? Or in other words, how long do you want it to take before you're going to reach those 10 just noticeable fades with your collection materials? Now that might seem like a super obvious question. Don't we all want our collections to last forever? But in reality, there are a lot of different answers to that question and ways to address how you handle lighting. We're going to go through a couple of different examples, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the Church History Museum. So my first example comes from the National Park Service and the Smithsonian. It's kind of a traditional in perpetuity model. The advantage of a system like this is that it favors long lifespans for objects. Your most sensitive materials If you were to exhibit them on this scheme, would last at least 300 years. And so for some of your more moderate organics, so things that are still sensitive to light, but not super sensitive, you're going to last well over 1,300 years. For your robust materials, you're talking even longer than that. So that's really fantastic. But there is a trade-off, and that is that it has very short exhibit periods. If you notice, it says things like 3 months in a 5-year period, 6 months in a 5-year period, which means that you have to have the manpower and ability to take things down, put new things up on a frequent basis. So a different strategy, here my example comes from the Victoria and Albert Museum, is to say, you know what, I'm just going to accept that my collection has a finite lifespan. For institutions that do this, 500 years tends to be the most commonly accepted number for how long they want their collection to last. The advantage is you get to leave objects up longer, which both reduces money, staff time, materials, all those things go down, but it also gives your visitors that emotional connection to materials. It gives them access to things that they might care about or that might be really passionate about seeing for longer periods of time. So you can see in this example, they have 4 sensitivity categories. Of those, they're only trying to control the amount of light that 2 of those categories receive. In one case, they say, you know what, we're just going to not put these materials out on exhibit. And in the other, you have 2 years before you need to rotate, which is, a lot more time than 3 months. So my next example comes from the National Museum of Australia. They also accepted the 500-year lifespan strategy. They really liked the V&A model when they saw it and they tried adopting it. But what they found was it was still insufficient for their needs. They could not keep up with the level of rotation that was required by the V&A model. And so they added another level to their strategy, and that is significance. In their strategy, you have 2 levels of significance. One, they term average significance objects, and that means that they were requested for display less than 10 years in 30. And then you have high significance objects, which means that they're requested for display more than 10 years in 30. For your average significance objects, you can leave them out for twice as long as your high significance objects. And that's because if you're going for a 500-year lifespan, things that are requested less frequently, you can leave them out twice as long, and they should get to that lifespan at about the same rate as the things that are being requested more frequently. So it gives a little extra flexibility, but you do have to be kind of tracking how popular is your collection, what items are desirable to be displayed frequently. So my last example here comes from the M+ Museum, which is a contemporary art museum in Hong Kong. They also went with a significance-based model, but they changed it a little. Instead of having a finite lifespan goal for their entire collection, they came up with different significance ratings and gave each their own lifespan goal, ranging from 25 to 200 years. In order to do this, they had to value their collection, which they did by looking at the items, how artistically or historically significant were those items, how integral were they to the exhibit narrative, and to what degree was light damage going to change their value or significance. And they came up with 4 significance ratings. You then take those lifespan goals, like I said, ranging from 25 to 200 years, and you correlate it against the object's light sensitivity rating. They actually do have a light fade meter, and so they could get really, really precise light fade or light sensitivity information for their collection. And from, correlate those 2 items and you know exactly how long you're going to be able to leave something up before it needs rotation. So here in this chart, we have our 3 most sensitive light levels for materials. And you already, those ones that are in blue don't need rotation. So you've already just cut the amount of work that you need to do, potentially by quite a bit, by adopting a system like this. However, it takes time to come up with how your museum is going to value your collection. And that's an ideological subject that not all institutions feel comfortable addressing or assigning values levels to their collection items. And of course, you also need a lot of buy-in from all levels. You need administration, conservation, curation. Everybody kind of needs to be on the same page for a system like this to work. So at the Church History Museum, for a long time, we were using an in perpetuity model, but we found it just didn't really meet our needs. We have a large history collection. We're based on a storytelling model where we often had a limited number of objects that could tell any particular story. And so we needed to leave things up longer than was really appropriate for an in perpetuity model. And so we've been talking over the last couple of years about what would better fit our institution. And what we decided was that a system similar to the M+ model, where we assigned value ratings to our collection, was with different lifespan goals for those different levels, was what we wanted to do. So this is a really stripped down version of the rubric that we use when we value our collection. We're kind of basing this on teaching models where you have a teaching rubric. Each of these areas, we look at what is the storytelling potential of the object, what is its level of historic proof, how scarce is it, and then since we also have art materials in our collection, when it's appropriate, what is its artistic quality. Each of those is given a points rating for 4 different levels of significance, and we're able to basically add up the points and come up with a value rating for our collection. We then used a chart like this, which in yellow, those are different lifespan goals that you could have for your collection. Across the top are the different light sensitivity levels. And we looked at, okay, what would that actually mean practically for rotations at different lifespan goals? Now, we are still in the process of approval, so I'm not going to share our exact numbers that we have come up with, but a chart like this could be used by anyone. So I would just highly recommend that if you are at an institution that does not currently have a lighting strategy, that you look through different materials that are available. Like I said, we've got stuff that we'll be passing out. There's other stuff available online, different articles, and that you select a lighting strategy because it gives you so much more power to make decisions and to know what to expect, to know what items are going to need rotation, when those rotations should occur, how many objects are you going to need for any given display that you might be planning, or just to know how long you can expect that your continuously displayed objects are probably going to exist before you might need to replace them with something new. And so now I'm going to turn the time over to Stacey to talk about how we get from kind of this theoretical background to boots on the ground applications in the museum.
Thank you, Shiree, for that wonderful and detailed presentation about all of those different basically ways of managing light. I'm just going to talk about the strategies that we use at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts to manage light exposure for our collection. And I'll also talk about some tips and tricks that we employ when we light works in our building. That's UMFA. So now that you've heard several detailed examples of how light budgets can be applied, I'm going to sort of break down our collection at the UMFA and then how we do it. So this is how our collection is categorized. It's actually quite simplified. It isn't a direct reflection of any of the examples that Shiree listed earlier, but it's more of a combination of some of the examples. But the idea is that we definitely do have the idea of preservation, like preserving our collection in perpetuity. In our collection, we have 3 main levels of light sensitivity, high, medium, and none. And materials like works on paper, photographic materials, textiles, and plastics are placed in the highly sensitive category. And these are put on view between 3 to 5 foot candles, usually 5. And of course, no UV. And for every month that they go on view, they have to rest for 1 year. And then for oil paintings, wood objects and leather, these are considered medium sensitivity objects, and these can be showed between 10 to 15 foot candles, no UV. And for every 3 years they're on view, they have to rest for 2 years. And then we have more stable materials like stone, metals, ceramics, and glass, and they don't have light sensitivity, and we tend to light them at about 20 foot candles. And this is not because, you know, there should be a limit on them, but it's about continuity in the gallery. So it doesn't make sense to light them extremely brightly and then everything else is so dark. In the past, UMFA used to have a 4-month rotation schedule with the goal of showing more of our light-sensitive works on paper and photographic collections. But over time, this schedule showed to create too much pressure on our curatorial and collections teams. And so this rotation schedule was adjusted to 6 months instead. So when curators create checklists for their rotations or exhibitions, the works are immediately checked on their light budget. So when they put objects on this, up for exhibition, the understanding is immediately that whatever they do choose is going to rest for 6 years. So this is how we measure the light budget in UMFA. And there are obviously many ways to do this. This is just one way. So you don't need some kind of special program or tool to calculate the light budget. So using our existing database and the location tracker that we have on our database, this is how I measure the light budget. So for example, if this tanka, which is a highly sensitive object, was being called for exhibition, the first thing that I do is I take the year that it's going on view. So for this presentation, we're going to pretend that we're putting it on view on 2022. So 2022, and then I minus off the year that it joined the collection. So for this object, that would be 1979. And you can only truly know what has happened to your object when it's in your care and not before. So anything that happened before it was excess, like just forget about it. So when I take 2022 minus 1979, I get how many months of available display time this object has since its acquisition. So in this case, that would be 43 months. And then I go through all of its exhibition history and add up any months that the work has been on view since its accession. So you can see that in 2020, the object was on view for 7 months between August 2020 to March 2021. So I subtract this and then I'm left with 36 months. So yes, if the curators want, this object can go on view for a 6-month rotation. So if your database has any kind of location tracker, this is a really good way to begin tracking your light budget for the future. So I'm going to do it again with a second example. So again, the year that the object may go on exhibition is 2022. And then I minus off the year of accession, which for this object is 2010. So I have 10 months of available time. And then this work has been on view twice since then. So one period was for 8 months and another for 6, which means that we have a negative light budget of 4 months. So what does negative 4 months mean? It just means that this object has to actually rest for 4 years. You can also see that in this instance, the work was then further, even though it had a negative 4 months light budget, it was then further approved for outgoing loan. And I just want to stress that these decisions are not made lightly. It involves a lot of discussion between various parties, including our director, our curatorial colleagues. And I just want to emphasize my next point, being flexible. So this first example I'm going to share with you are 3-dimensional works by Dwayne Linkletter. He's a Canadian First Nations artist of Cree ancestry. And these works are 3D printed works made from ABS plastic. And plastic is considered a highly sensitive material. In late 2021, these works were sent on an outgoing loan to support a large exhibition of this particular artist. And at that time, we knew that the work would need to rest until 2028 upon its return to UMFA, in accordance with our lighting policy. However, shortly after this show, another institution expressed their wish to mount the same show in 2023. And this, of course, goes completely against our recommendations when it comes to following our lighting policy. So here are some close-ups of the objects. The idea of, I want to say idea and ideal of preserving objects in perpetuity does not always line up with the wishes of a living artist, along with our goal as an institution to provide access to our collection. And I don't just mean potential beneficiaries in the future, but also people who are alive now in the present day. As an institution, we also want to do our part to support an important artist in our collection during his lifetime and not when he is gone. And these are really important factors that have a place in these discussions when it comes to displaying objects. So for these objects, we decided to support the artist and send his works on a second outgoing loan with the intention to continue to support his exhibitions. And this might mean that, his works may never be displayed at UMFA to support, the growth of this artist. Here is an example of degradation on ABS plastic when exposed to light and UV, and I have it over there so you can play with it later. But I want to call attention to a link that I included in our resource page. It is an article in the Journal of the Institute of Conservation called Beyond Lifetimes, Who Do We Exclude When We Keep Things for the Future? And I highly recommend it as it fleshes out these concepts and encourages us as collections professionals to rethink some of the ways that we operate and why. The next artwork I will talk about is this work on paper by Edgar Arsenault. This work is very, very large. It's about 100 by 140 inches in size. And yes, it is not framed and it is not intended to be framed. The graphite, charcoal, and soil components that the artist used in the creation of this work is very friable, as you can imagine. But unfortunately, due to the size of the work and its format, it has to be rolled for storage. And you can see it, it's the second to the top. As you can imagine, every time this object is called for exhibition, the work first needs to be unrolled and flattened for about 3 months to reduce that curling. And then after it's been flattened, which is what has happened here already, and we're preparing to take it upstairs, it has to be rolled in order to be moved to the galleries again, because there's no surface large enough to push it through the galleries all the way upstairs. Once it goes upstairs, it's then unrolled again for installation. And every time the object is rolled and unrolled, there's actually visible media loss collected in the packing material used for the work. So when you look in the plastic, there'll be like lots of these black specks. With that in mind, does it make sense for it to be displayed for 6 months? No, it doesn't, because basically every time we handle it, we're having physical damage that is probably worse or even on par with the light damage that it's going to undergo. So in this situation, we do not display it for 6 months. We display it for at least a year before it's taken down. I'm going to talk about another strategy that is a potential for use, and we have used it at UMFA. This portfolio of 48 inkjet prints by David Taylor and Marcos Ramirez-Eyre is part of a large traveling exhibition called Many Wests, and it's going to 5 institutions, including the UMFA. Inkjet prints are extremely light sensitive, and normally works like this can never be shown in all venues. Like if there's 5 venues, you might show it at 2, and then you would rotate like different works into the show. But this work was really important in the show. And so what we did, is this working? The mic? Oh, okay. All right. So what we did was we had a lot of discussions with the artists, and UMFA commissioned an exhibition copy that will travel specifically for this show, and then it would be destroyed upon completion of the exhibition. And this basically keeps UMFA's accession work from being overexposed and incurring visible fading. So now I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks that we use at UMFA to control our light levels. And some of these might be very familiar to some of you. So if you know it, that's really wonderful, but I hope somebody learned something from this. So the first one is that any kind of bonnets or glazing actually reduces light levels by 1 foot candle. So if you're using your light meter and you're trying to, achieve a 5 foot candle or 3 foot candle level, don't forget that if the object is glazed or in a bonnet, you can remove 1 foot candle. The second thing we do And this is, of course, just based on your lighting system. But at UMFA, some of our tracks are positioned in like really bad places, frankly, and very close to the wall. And so we're not really able to achieve very low light levels. So what we do is actually we just bounce the light off the floor, and it actually looks really good, but it drops the light level significantly. If you have a lighting system that is somewhat modular, like the one that we have in the picture on the left, you can take advantage of the accessories that come with it. So for instance, the LSI track heads, they come with screens that allow us to take our light levels down. But these screens can actually become really expensive if you have a lot of sensitive artworks that are going on view. So what you can do is you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy aluminum mesh screen meshes. And then you cut them into circles and you place them inside the track heads. But remember that you have to buy aluminum ones. You cannot buy polyester because the heat from the LED lights will melt the plastic. That's not good because you have melting plastic falling on your visitors. So. The other thing I want to stress is that if you want to make any change at all, just start with your windows. If there are any windows in your galleries, just block them off with anything. If you have money for shades, great. If you can build a fake wall, do it. Or you can just do something really economical, like applying vinyl to the entire interior of the window. Also, don't forget that just because if a window is in an adjoining gallery or adjoining space, it doesn't mean that the light may not hit your gallery. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring like your security cameras over the seasons, because just because you do not see the sunlight hitting the artwork, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. It could be happening at a specific time that you're not in the building in a specific season. Just because, you know, the sun rises at a different time, and no one is ever going to be in the building 24/7 to monitor that. And then following what Shiree was saying as well, don't forget about the other lights that might be present in your gallery. You have your gallery lights that, you know, maybe are LED like ours, but there are other lights too, like security lights, and those could be fluorescent lights. And you want to check with your light meter if they're emitting UV. And if you have lights like that, you can do something like use UV film to block out the UV. And my last point is that lighting can and should be planned ahead. You have to learn the limitations of your system and your space. So these are our temporary exhibition galleries at the UMFA. And when we plan the layout of our exhibitions, I already start thinking about lighting. For instance, I know that the red circle in the gallery is actually a really difficult place to light three-dimensional sensitive objects. So if they start trying to put something there that's really light sensitive, that's really big, or that it hangs from the ceiling, I try to tell them, oh, why don't we put it in the green area instead? Because I know that it's much easier to hit the correct light level and make the object look good there. And the same thing would go for thinking about grouping your objects. Encourage, you know, your team to group similar sensitivity materials together, because the last thing you want for your visitors is to look at something that's lit at 15-foot candles, and then next to it is a work on paper that's lit at 5-foot candles. The eyes cannot adjust. It has to be a gradual change so that visitors do not think that, hey, you guys forgot to light this particular work, because you didn't. It's just darker. That's all I have. I'm going to hand it off to Tiffany.
Okay, I'm really short, so we'll see how that works. Okay, can you guys hear me? I'm assuming yes. Okay, so now that we've talked about the different lighting policies, I'm here to discuss ways you can display your light sensitive collection safely. Now, by no means are these the only options. These are just some examples to give you ideas of different methods that might work for you and your collection. So at the MOA, we have over 18,500 objects. Over 13,000 are works on paper, photographs, washes, watercolors, or light sensitive objects. So we are constantly trying to find ways to showcase our works on paper, including them in longer exhibitions in a safe method by minimizing their light damage. So the most common way I bet you guys are all familiar with are rotation schedules. We typically use the perpetuity model where it's up for 3 months and then it rests for 5 years. So We currently have an exhibition that's up for 2 years, and there are 2 works on papers within this exhibition, which means we need 8 rotations to cover the entire course of the exhibition. So here's just like a little spreadsheet that shows the rotation number, the object that will go up for that rotation, and then the different sections, and then the date of when I need to remind myself to switch the objects. So we're able to do a lot of these rotations because we have such a large collection with the same amount of prints from the same artist, or we have similar themes so that it can continue into the exhibition. So here's some of my students switching one a couple weeks back. And so some of the pros of rotation schedules is it allows more works on paper to go on view to the public. It also kind of revitalizes the exhibition every couple months as new works go up. And yeah, makes it kind of look a little new. But some of the cons are just things that you need to consider if you're considering a rotation schedule is the amount of work it puts on your staff. For the exhibition that I'm currently talking about, we only have 2 works that we're switching out. So that's only a total of 16 objects. But if you're having like 16 objects within a collection that is switching, you're going to have a lot more rotations and a lot more works that need to be prepped before the exhibition starts. So you're not doing that throughout the year. And then another con is you got to keep that in the budget. If you have to get these conserved, if you have to have them matted or framed, that needs to be something to be considered as well. And then also the spacing. Sometimes different prints are going to be different sizes and they're going to be framed to different sizes. So when you're laying out the exhibition, you need to make sure you're starting with your smallest object and then working your way to the biggest and then planning for that so it doesn't mess up the spacing at the end. But that way, if you start with small and go to big, you don't have to patch holes every time you are switching out the rotations. So another way we're able to kind of showcase some of our big hitters is we have a print study room and we're able to showcase like our Albrecht Dürer, our Rembrandts, our Japanese wood blocks, and our modernist prints. Every semester, since we are connected to a university, we put these on view for about 3 days, each section for about 3 days every semester so that they are being shown and the public is able to see these as well so that we can show our big hitters, but also keep the light damage minimal since they're only up for a few days. So another method that you can implement in your museum is lowering the light levels. So as mentioned by my colleagues, typically the light levels are between 5 and 7 foot candles for works on paper. By lowering the light levels, you can have the exhibition up for longer, so longer than the 3-month rest for 5 years. So we currently have an exhibition up that has 130 gouaches by James Tissot, and these are on loan from the Jewish Museum in New York. And we were able to work with the lenders to allow us to show these for more than 9 months, but then have the foot candles at 3. So as you can see, that's extremely low. I actually took a reading of this room before we turned the lights down. It was at a 40-foot candle, and now it's between a 3 and a 4. So it's a lower light level. So some things to consider that we found with this exhibition is possibly using a lighter paint color so that it doesn't look as dark. As you can see in the gallery next, this is like at a 7-foot candle, and then these are at 3. So it's a lot brighter. We've had problems with patrons, especially older patrons, not being able to read our labels. So we've had to reprint them to be a little bit bigger font. And then we've also had to add extra signages because patrons have been turning on their cell phone lights, and that causes even more damage. So we've had to ask the security guards to nicely remind people not to turn on their lights and to just view them as they are. So some of the pros of this is you're able to keep the works up for longer. The exhibit doesn't need to change, and you're able to show more of the works. Like that's why you're able to show all 130 of these gouaches at once. But the cons just to consider is it might be a little too dark for some patrons. Consider the wall colors, and then cell phones might become an issue. So another example or another method is extended exposure. So this is if you want to have the works up for longer, then they're just going to have a longer rest, which we kind of already talked about. We have an upcoming exhibition, and the curator is actually in the audience. This is McCrae Maggleby's posters, and the exhibition opens on March 3rd if you're interested. But these works, we got all of these, the collection of his posters back in 2016, and they have never been on exhibit. And so when talking about this exhibition, we've decided that since there's no, this is a very specific thesis, and they're probably not going to go on exhibit again for the next foreseeable future, we've decided to extend the exhibition so it's a lot longer, so that they get their time in for the public, but then they'll have their time to rest as well. Another method that we've been experimenting with at the MOA is dark rooms. So this is basically creating a space within a larger exhibition that is solely for works on paper. Basically, we're able to do this because we do have a very odd shaped building. And so we're able to make 2 dark rooms in this past American show that we had a couple of years ago, where we built the walls up right here to make it a little bit smaller opening, and then these in here were all the works on paper. And basically we had motion sensors and timers, so as a patron would walk into the room, the motion sensor would turn on the lights, and the timer would start running, and basically keep track of how long the lights are on. So if we're working with the 3-month model for each rotation, that would be around 900 hours that you want to kind of track. So we're able to check it every couple months, and we were able to get a whole year out of this, out of these dark rooms, which was great. And the only reason we could have gone a little bit longer, but we shut down for COVID, and I decided just to switch to the next rotation to revitalize the exhibition. So here's a picture of what it looked like in person. And you can see the lights are on this side, and then the lights are off on that side. And yeah, so it worked out really, really well, and we were happy with the results. So here's a little bit close up. We originally had 8 rotations planned, but we only had to go through 2. So some of the pros of this is the works can be up for longer. There's less rotations, less stress on the staff, and then you're able to kind of control the lights with the motion sensor and timers. The cons are we've done this in the past in this exhibition room, and it wasn't as successful because it was a smaller gallery. The room was extremely dark and didn't look inviting to the patrons. So a lot of times people wouldn't walk in and didn't know that there was an extra space where they could see some works. So make sure that there's signage if you're using dark rooms, so that people know that there is another space. And then depending on your gallery space, it can be kind of hard to find a space that will work for a dark room, and it can add extra costs. So if you're thinking about adding a dark room, just consider that. So some more examples that you can consider. Smart glass. So the Church History Museum actually has this case right here. And let me, sorry, I got a little mixed up. Okay, so these display cases switch to transparent mode when someone's like close to it, and then they go back to their dark mode when there's no movement. And these both protect from UV and visible light, and you're able to customize them to have like 3D objects. They're able to hold a little bit more than maybe having drawers, which I'll show in just a second. Some of the cons of these are extremely expensive, and they are kind of tricky to control and to set up. And they really only, once they're built, you can't have something that's like a lot larger. It's kind of you're contained to that space. But a little bit cheaper option is to do exhibition drawers, and I'm hoping to one day implement this since we do show a lot of our Rembrandts and our Japanese wood blocks. If we had these drawers, you can basically have the works out almost permanently, so patrons can pull them out, see the works, they're protected. You can have them secured in the drawers, so as people are pulling, they're not shifting around. In this way, yeah, you can show a lot of objects at once, but the cons is it will limit your space. They're kind of expensive, not as expensive as smart glass, so this is another option, but it's a great way to show a lot of objects at once and on display almost permanently. And then we kind of talked about exhibition prints with Stacey, but there's also the option of facsimiles. So we used a facsimile in an exhibition a couple years ago where it was a Japanese wood block that was that influenced an artist. And so we had the original up for 3 months. And then when it was taken down, we replaced it with a facsimile. Because it was that specific print, but we made sure that the labels and everything specifically says that is a facsimile, it's not a real object. And so then you can still have it up for the whole, like it was a 5-year exhibition, and get the effect, but then the object is not burnt out. Now, once you have your exhibition all set up, you got to check your light levels, and the most common tool for that is the LSAC meters. How many of you guys have used LSAC meters? Perfect. So some of you guys already know. So this is basically what they say. We're going to have you guys come up afterwards. We have some LSAC meters that you guys can play with. And I also have a cheaper like Amazon option. But with these meters, here's the sensors at the top. And then you can check for visible and UV. So basically, you turn on which one you want. You're going to want to hold the artwork, or not the artwork, hold the meter in front of the artwork at different locations. Oh, sorry. To check for hot spots. And you want to just do it parallel to the work without touching it. And then you're going to press whichever one you're checking for. So if you're checking for visible light, you're going to hold it and it's going to have like a little circle that's going to pop up in the corner. Right here, it'll pop up right here. And then once it turns to an H, that's when it's holding and will give you an accurate reading. And then if you're doing 3D objects, you want to make sure that you do it from each plane, so either vertical and horizontal, and then check different spots on the work for hot spots. Now you can get these LSAC meters, they're kind of expensive. And what I found out while we were doing this presentation is you do have to recalibrate them every 2 years. And the one I brought was last calibrated in 2001. So that is something I will need to consider in my next budget. But if you don't have an LSAC meter, but you're wanting to try and be better about light levels in your museum, there is an option of finding just like a photo sensor on Amazon. This one was only $40 and I have it here for you guys to play with. It only checks visible lights. It does do foot candles and lux, so depending on what you prefer, but it doesn't do UV. And comparing it to my very old calibrated LSAC, it actually is quite comparable. And you basically do the same thing where you can either press the lux or the foot, and then you can hold it to figure out what the light is reading in your gallery. And yeah, so we have these up here so you guys can come see. We've also got some light tracks and the mesh to look at. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free. There's the email list going around. We have lots of resources for you. And yeah, feel free to contact us at any time.